Good morning, or good evening, or whenever perhaps you are listening or tuning into this. Welcome to this week's edition of Church in Lockdown. Feel free to set this up or listen to this wherever you feel comfortable, in the living room, in your room, outside. It's a lovely day, perhaps. Go for a walk, put your headphones in, whatever space you feel comfortable with. Set up shop. So today we are going to be exploring and delving into the depths of Jonah. Chapter two, verses 1 to 10 to be specific, and that is the prayer within the giant fish, or as some people think, a whale. Both are probably valid interpretations because taxonomy in those days was weird and people had not created the same divisions that we have today in terms of morphologies, which would probably make a modern biology slightly twitch. But whatever the case, let's first off open with pondering and investigating the space that he has just been dumped into in the text. Jonah, just before being sucked up by a whale or fish, has been placed into an environment, is it correct to say, that is quite otherworldly to the human experience. And by that I mean perhaps more of a physiological note there. The deep sea, the depths, large bodies of water, these are spaces that if we find ourselves plopped into, without specialized gear that we have at our disposal today, it becomes very apparent very quickly just how ill-equipped the human body is for dwelling in that kind of space for any extended period of time. So, like, even the strongest swimmers of us, without all the specialized equipment of floaties or snorkel gear or scuba gear or flippers or even a boat to stand on, we are, not exactly equipped or adapted to long-term inhabitants of that space. These are the great oceans and depths. They're only places accessible to us because of technologies. Even a simple boat is something that can take us into that space, as simple as that is. We need that. We can't just swim out at our own volition and camp out there. We are very ill-equipped for long term. It's essentially another world, and that's, I guess, why a lot of ancient Near Eastern texts interpret deep bodies of water, ocean, as quite a chaotic, otherworldly environment. A lot of those ancient Near Eastern texts, and a lot we can find within the Bible, depict the great bodies of water as essentially, spaces of chaos, of disaster, of unknown. This is a place where giant monsters and the beasts like the Leviathan reside, right? This is a place where the whole premise of Noah in his narrative is these deep bodies washing over everything, and that's the worst thing that humanity can face. They'll all drown. Terrifying anxieties around that. In that mythos, there's so much attachment and symbolism placed there just around the chaotic element of water. Even in the creation mythoses around in the ancient Near East, even in the opening texts of Genesis, uh, deep bodies of water are given this deep, unknown, uninhabitable for human dot point to begin with. Before there was order placed in it, there was just the water, the deep waters. It's such a, for the symbolism attached to that then is just so weighted in the fact that these humans looking out, thinking about the ocean, were just so overwhelmed with the fact that this is such a space of unknown for us. Like, now we have lots more technology where we can start to even glimpse into some of the deep sea going on, but even then we've explored so little of it that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do the deep oceans, right? It's such an otherworldly space for us as humans to engage with. Our physiology is just not able to be up to the task of staying in there for long, long periods of time. And where do we find Jonah being plopped into? Well, here we are, straight into the stormy seas, tossed off the boat. His one thing he could stand on in the midst of it, and now he's straight into the deep seas. Um, this is a space that he is probably freaking out, and he's probably at this point, as he's flailing around in the sea, after just being tossed off, as he was trying to escape from where God was calling him. We'll get more into that in a moment. But anyway, he's probably thinking things can't get any worse, right? He's probably screaming out to God as he's flailing around in the sea after being just thrown overboard. Things can't possibly get any worse, and suddenly giant fish emerges behind him for the swallow. And this is exactly, if this was some kind of film, that you'd expect the record scratch and freeze frame. I suppose you're wondering how I got here. Okay, context time. Let's dive into exactly how Jonah got into this predicament in the first place. So, Jonah has just been plopped into the sea because he was on a boat that was heading for Tarshish. Now, he's on that boat to begin with because he was not eager to go the way he was called to. So, God had given him basically a command. I want you, my faithful prophet, to go to Nineveh and deliver to the Assyrians there, the settlement there, that what's at stake. The trajectory they're going is not healthy. It's not good. I want you to basically, Jonah, call them out and offer them the opportunity to repent. Jonah, not keen. Not keen. Heads towards Joppa. Where's the nearest boat to Tarshish? He ponders, and Lord behold, there's a boat waiting in the harbour. More than willing to take him the other way. Now, hops on that boat. He wasn't so keen, perhaps, to go to, Nineveh. Not because he was scared of what the Assyrians would do to him. No. He wasn't scared of being killed. He wasn't scared of the ridicule. No, he had a different underlying reason that the text kind of alludes to and highlights as well. He wasn't so much concerned about what they do. He kind of accepted, like, if that was what it came down to, not a problem. His concern was more with the fact that they might actually repent. That when he gives them this warning, that the city would actually take up that opportunity of God's grace. And that's why he was so eager to turn the other way and run as far away from Nineveh as he could. He didn't want to give that opportunity. That's what he feared. That's what Jonah was concerned about. And the text makes that very clear at points, that he knew of God's grace, and he knew that essentially if he presented it, that would give an opportunity to his enemies. He wasn't cozy, like Jewish people were not cozy with the Assyrians at this point. And so being presented with this opportunity, they might turn around, and that's not what he wants. So he's more than willing to go, 1,200 miles or something crazy away from where he's supposed to be in order to try to ensure that they don't even get that thing presented on the table, that opportunity presented on the table for them. Oh, have I talked about the parody elements yet? No? Okay, let's delve into those. Because the book of Jonah is also incredibly well written in terms of its parody satire that's going on. So, underneath the skin, A lot of scholars have kind of highlighted that the book of Jonah is essentially a parody of views held by members of the Jewish society at the time when it was written. It particularly and poignantly seems to target a group called the separationists. There we go, I got it in the end. The separationists who believed that God would destroy those who disobeyed him, that sinful cities would be obliterated, and that God's mercy did not extend to those outside of the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, so here we have Jonah presented as in many ways as the most orthodox of the Israelite theologians to make this theological point. Jonah's statements in the book are characterized by this kind of militancy to them. His kind of way he goes about things. It's also ironic, his name as well. Here's another element of that parody, right? Though he goes around about things in quite this kind of militant kind of way of like, his name means dove. A bird which the ancient Israelites associated with peace. Peace and calm. This is most certainly not Jonah, and the irony of that name would most certainly not have not been lost on the early readers. Jonah's rejection as well of God's command is also a parody of the obedience of the prophets of old. In other Old Testament writers, it's the obedient prophets that stand before these kings. And here we are presented with the king of Nineveh, who then instantly repents, unlike the stories of the Old Testament, where the kings would be hardened and the prophets would be trying their hardest. But here, the parody is the subversion of the expectations, where it's God's prophet that is, I guess, so detached from that commandment and so eager to not bring that message. And here we have the kingdom as a whole turning around almost instantaneously at this prophetic warning. Even in the like, so to backtrack to the when he's on the boat itself, the readiness of those sailors to worship God and put everything down, and they were doing their darndest. They're the ones that are already while Jonah's sleeping in the midst of this storm and he's underground. They're trying their best. They're praying to their gods. They're being faithful to their gods in their way. And what's Jonah doing? Well, he's sleeping on his big sack of comfort down in the bowels of the ship. And when he's shaken up and like, how can you sleep at a time like this? He comes to the realization that, oh, bugger, this is my fault. And he's trying to emphasize this, and that the only way to get rid of this storm is to basically throw him over. They try for quite some time with such little success to keep him on board. They're like, no, we're not doing that. That's insane, dude. We're not throwing you overboard. And despite Jonah saying that, they try adamantly for quite a while to just keep going. And eventually they buckle and Jonah's put overboard, and suddenly everything's calm again. And then they go straight to worshipping God. Ironically, they're the one given they they were willing to do all they could. Parody. It's a beautiful thing. It subverts the expectations. And it's because of those subversive expectations that now we have perhaps the most comedic element to it. He's now in the bowels of a fish and not a ship. And it is in this fish, after 3, I imagine, very long and uncomfortable days, that we get to this prayer. I'm just going to read it here in this little segment, just so we can, again, just listen to it, sit in it, and really engage with the depth of it, because it's beautiful. Let's just listen. In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled around me, all the waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me, the deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever, but you, Lord my God, brought me my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to the holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God, his love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And then God commands the fish to basically regurgitate him back onto shore. And that's where Jonah then picks up and heads towards Nineveh. That prayer is so right. It encapsulates just God's salvific work. It just encapsulates the extent of God's grace. It highlights that even though he is sunk to his lowest point, God is still there, and he just outpours. He highlights the points that he was basically sucked down into the sea, a place of such deep torment for him, and he's stressing out. And he's been giving God, keep in mind, the silent treatment for quite some time. And this is the prayer that breaks that silence. And he's just going full bore with highlighting just how far God's grace extends. And that's responded to. And the next thing you know, he's washed up on shore. Jonah got it. The point that God was trying to make is, and Jonah just fully understands that salvation is so beautiful and so deep, and not even in this most, even when we're in our most struggling points, when we feel like we've just been swallowed by a fish after being tossed in the ocean, there's hope. There's glimmers of hope in it. And that's beautiful. And he picks up and takes that very message that he basically responded to in that prayer to the people of Nineveh. He gives them their warning. He gives them this opportunity to repent and change their ways that were going off the rails. He gives that opportunity, and what do? They actually listen, and they turn around and they're like, yeah, okay, what do we got to do? Next thing you know, the king and all the people and the whole town are just fasting. They're putting on sackcloths. They're repenting. They're changing their ways. They're like, okay, this whole crazy thing that we've been doing, this off the rails stuff we've been doing, we're going to actually change that. We're going to start to look towards beautiful practices in life, and the whole town is essentially given this opportunity, and they take it up. It's beautiful. And how does Jonah respond to that? Now, the grace of God is now overflowing over this whole city, and they're given fresh new life opportunities. And how does Jonah respond? Well, of course, he's celebrating with them. He's so excited for them. He recognizes, yes, God, your salvation has come, and this is beautiful. The city is now, your light is just shining so radiantly. This is just inspiring. And he's so happy for them, right? Nah. Jonah is he humps out of the city. He kind of waddles out of the city. He sits down, builds his own little shelter, and he watches to see what happens to the city. He's on his own. He's having his grump. He's watching it, and nothing's happening. God's obviously spared the city, and next thing you know, he's suddenly got this little plant that's grown over him, that God's delivered him, this nice little plant to give him shade and shelter. And it kind of relieves some of his grumpiness for a while. He's just still kind of like, whatever. Well, this shade is kind of nice. Thank you, God, for delivering that. But then God gives it a worm that eats away at a caterpillar of some kind. It seems to munch through his plant. And it withers away, and next thing you know, he's getting sunburn, and the top of his poor little baldy head is not having a good time. And then he gets super grumpy about that too. And now he's looking at this city that's just been saved, grumpy. His plant that was just given to him, taken away, grumpier. Now he's so to the point where he's like, I just wish I was dead. Jonah's responding out of such a frustration that he's missing the whole point. He goes on to say things like, it would be better for me to die than to live now. And God's like, hey, but is it right for you to be angry about the plant? And Jonah just responds with like, it is. He said, I'm just so angry, I wish I were dead. He's not having a ball. God, this is where Jonah ends, by the way. It just literally cuts off after this. But the Lord said, you have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concerned myself with the great city of Nineveh, in which there were more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hands from their left, and also many animals? And literally on that animal point, that's where the book of Jonah ends. It's just a question. Such a concluding statement. There's no nice, neatly wrapped up bow put over the book of Jonah and tied nicely and presented like, yeah. we literally ended on that, just question. And that's what I love about the book of Jonah too. It doesn't end on a happy note either, for Jonah at least. The whole city's just been saved, but Jonah's so stuck in his box of, I guess, nationalism in this case, as well as his prejudices. And he can't actually see the beauty that's just unfolded. He's so wrapped up in his own little worldview box of frustration and his desired outcomes that he's just not having any of this hope and love that's just been outpoured to this city. He would rather just die now. He's just not happy. And he got it. This is the frustrating bit as well, that he got it in the fish, in the bowels of the fish. He got it and recognized, and then he slips back into his grumpy, bitter ways. And sometimes I ponder, like, in my own life, what times can I be like Jonah? When can I get it, and then suddenly something comes along that I didn't want in that narrative, and suddenly I'm back to at a frustrated space. And we've all been Jonah at some point, I'm sure, right? We're human, and we need to learn that. The reason this is so emphasized and stretched to its extreme in the book of Jonah is to highlight the nonsense of it. He didn't tend that plant that he was so grumpy about, and he just is so caught up in those little minute details that he's missing the big picture. 120,000 people plus all these animals were just literally saved, but he's so caught in his rigid model. Sometimes there are things that we can just absolutely miss, and we can miss the humanizing and more like elements of these things in the world. I think it's something we really need to be aware of. Check and gauge ourselves in a lot of that sometimes, or otherwise we will miss the beauty. Even a clear example that I can think of right now is just things like lockdown, of what we might learn in the midst of the bowels of this fish, that we think, yeah, we really need to take this out to the other side. These beautiful elements that we did learn in this darkened space, and these lessons we've learned. Then I don't want to go out the other side and things that I've learned in struggling times and be like, yeah, I didn't learn anything. All those opportunities that I was thinking about taking up, I'm just not going to bother engaging with. I'd rather be grumpy about it and think about what I don't have. Anyway, let's move into communion. So, in conclusion, sometimes this message about a posture of active prayer can happen even in the bowels and stomach contents of a great fish. The darkest depths you can imagine, the the worst space you can possibly conjure in your mind, God's not absent from. Even in the abyssal deep, a place that we might be so out of our depth, in a very literal sense here, God's still there. And it's in that prayer as well, when we're at our lowest, that we can have such beautiful revelations that come to us as well, that suddenly we can see that clarity and it can really stick out to us. We can grow so much of it. It can put us back on track and bring such life to others as well. But in that prayer and the beauty of it and the clarity in it as well, Jonah also highlights how it's all too easy as well to just fall back into old patterns, old grudges, old bitternesses, old prejudices. It also warns us as well of the dangers. So, because we can get it, we can have these beautiful revelations, but we have to hold on to them and really reaffirm them and really just continually grapple with them, right? When Jesus, I guess, called his disciples around him and enjoyed the Last Supper, that was a belly of a fish, right? That's a dark, dark place as he gives this beautiful meal before them. And when he picks it up, he's drink it in remembrance of me, and they're all confused. Jesus is in his darkest moment, leading up to the crucifixion side of things. He's really grappling with that, and how far am I willing to go? All these things are coming to mind, and the beauty of the Last Supper, surrounded by his friends that have been journeying around him, and even the one who was about to betray him, he chose to find such beautiful hope in that. And he lifted his cup and he took his offering and that whole scene encompasses something so rich. And I think that's worth noting. Here's to communion. Let us eat in remembrance. And drink. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing each and every one of you again in person in the not too distant future. Bless you guys. Lots of love.